The ring sliced through the quiet like a blade through silk. I blinked at the clock, 12:41 a.m., its green digits humming in the dark. My throat felt dry as I answered. My brother's voice, sharp and deliberate, filled the stillness. Mom died last night. The will's clear. I inherited everything. You get nothing. He paused, maybe waiting for me to crack. I did not. The hum of the refrigerator filled the gap he left. I could taste the bitterness of air that had not moved since dinner, metallic like unshed tears. I told him I understood, my voice thin but steady, and then hung up. The house remained perfectly still. I sat in that silence, feeling neither rage nor grief, just a slow, steady realization pulsing behind my ribs. And before I could stop myself, I smiled. A small private curve of the mouth he would never believe possible. Because I already knew something he did not. When dawn arrived, pale light sliding over frost-coated windows, I packed a small bag and started the drive home. The highway stretched out in front of me, the world hushed, newly hollow. My hands gripped the steering wheel, heartbeat matching the rhythm of passing lights. Shock began to loosen its hold, replaced by a calm that felt almost tender. Beneath that quiet surface, a single question began to echo, steady and inevitable. Why did I smile? I grew up in a town small enough that everyone knew which families had money and which had manners. Ours had a bit of both once, though the balance never felt even. The farmhouse stood at the top of a sloping hill, paint flaking from its shutters. But to the townsfolk it still glimmered with the old pride of our grandfather's name. My brother and I shared the same blood, but not the same shadows. He mastered the art of being admired, quick smile, confident gestures, the ease that comes from believing the world already belongs to you. I was steadier, quieter, content to finish chores while he charmed his way into every room. Mother used to say that both of us inherited fragments of our father's fire, my brother the spark, I the steady ember. She was a woman of hands rather than speeches, hands that kneaded dough after dawn-tide vines along the garden. Trellis straightened the same lace curtain each evening before dusk. I followed her rhythm more than her words. Together we mended fences, fixed leaking taps, planted bulbs that blazed briefly every spring. She spoke little, but the silences between us held entire conversations about patience, about pride, about how small kindnesses could outlast any fortune. Yet she worried about my brother's hunger for applause. During early morning coffee steam mingling with her sighs, she would run a thumb around her mug and murmur, he confuses shine with worth. There was never bitterness in her tone, only concern, shaped by love. When he arrived home wearing his latest success like cologne, she would simply smile, set another plate on the table, and ask if he had eaten. When I grew older, I built a modest life a few towns away. I taught woodworking at the community center, not glamorous but grounding. My evenings smelled of sawdust and coffee, my weekends were quiet and clean. People shook my hand, thanked me for teaching their sons to straighten a plank, to measure twice, to treat the grain with respect. It was not much, but it steadied me. Still, every now and again I would drive past clients' fancy houses and wonder what it might feel like to be properly seen, to be the one whose achievements filled a room with conversation instead of polite silence. Recognition, not riches, was what I secretly wanted. Mother never chastised me for small dreams. You build what lasts. She once told me, running her palm over a table I had made for her birthday. And you do it quietly. That is something people forget matters. Her eyes lingered then, as if studying a truth too heavy to name. It was only months before her death that she grew oddly intentional about small things. She cleaned old boxes, sorted documents, and spoke more slowly. One evening, as I packed the tools after tightening a hinge for her, she called me back. Her voice had softened in that way that warned of final lessons. From the pocket of her cardigan, she drew a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. Keep this, she whispered, pressing it into my hand. Not for now, for when you truly need it. I frowned, but she only smiled, that thin, luminous smile of hers, the one that said explanations could wait. I carried it home in my jacket that night, tucked it inside the drawer where I kept spare keys and bills, then forgot about it until the phone rang months later, slicing through the dark. The reading took place in the narrow office above Main Street that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. The attorney, an aging man with a voice like dry bark, tried to sound neutral, though everyone could sense where this was heading. My brother leaned back in the leather chair, his cufflinks catching the light, his confidence filling every unspoken corner of the room. When the words came, "The entirety of the estate and belongings shall pass to the elder son," he did not even hide. His grin, the pen in my hand, paused, yet my heartbeat did not quicken. I simply nodded, signing where told. The attorney looked at me, perhaps expecting protest or tears. I thanked him instead. My brother's smirk flickered as if my calm were an insult he had not rehearsed an answer for. Outside, sunlight burned too brightly on the courthouse steps. My brother clapped a hand on my shoulder, friendly in gesture, cruel in timing. "Guess Mom knew who could handle things," he said, that laughter of his thin as glass. Around us, people passing by glanced, whispering their speculations, their sympathy diluted by curiosity. I walked away before pride could unravel my silence. On the drive back, memories spooled out like old film dinners where his voice dominated. Every conversation, her small attempts to redirect my own words, swallowed before they reached the table. He would mock my work as glorified shop class, recounting his firm's profits to guests over roast chicken. When our father died, it was I who handled the nurses, the bills, the quiet logistics. He arrived for the funeral with polished shoes and condolences prepackaged for effect. None of it had surprised me, but that did not dull the sting. Humiliation, I had long learned, does not fade with repetition, it only becomes more precise. Yet I had also learned the usefulness of quiet. People mistake silence for surrender, but silence can sharpen memory. As I steered the car past the orchard, I thought of the envelope in my drawer. He thinks it is nothing, he always did. In the weeks that followed, he transformed our mother's house into his personal stage. Contractors swarmed the property. Walls, once lined with photographs, were stripped bare for a fresh start. He posted updates online, before and after shots, captions about legacy and hard work. I saw acquaintances applaud him with digital thumbs, and heart symbols, their praise loud, simple, fleeting. Each new post tugged something between pity and distant amusement inside me. He sold her china, claiming practicality. The piano went next to sentimental, he said. I imagined her small frown at the idea of family history reduced to profit. But grief has a strange way of cooling rage. Instead of resenting him, I began studying his choices, like a lesson in what emptiness truly looks like when disguised as success. Sometimes I drove out to the farmhouse, parking far enough away that he would not notice. From the hill, I could watch the stripped house gleam under the sun, almost sterile. The oak by the porch still bore the initials our mother had carved decades ago, a reminder that possession is never as complete as people think. At night, I returned to my apartment, sat in the kitchen beneath the low amber light, and read her old letters. Small things surfaced: her warning about shying versus worth, her gratitude for the child who listens rather than performs. The words felt freshly carved. Each line seemed to form a quiet scaffold around the storm he had tried to raise. Then came the image I could not shake: the attic. Just a month before her passing, she had been labeling boxes in her typical methodical way. I had found her up there under the single hanging bulb, carefully tying string around a wooden chest. She had etched a tiny shape into the lid, a symbol I recognized from her old sketchbook, something only the two of us used to mark our shared projects. She had caught my curious look and said softly, "Some things do not belong on anyone's list." That memory lingered steady and insistent. While my brother bragged about deeds and signatures, I began to sense that my inheritance had taken another form entirely, one not meant to be announced, only discovered. I no longer felt anger, only anticipation, quiet and patient as the dust in that attic, waiting for the right light. The attic groaned under my weight as I climbed its stairs late. One evening, dust rising in soft clouds around the narrow beam of my flashlight. The air smelled of time cedar paper and something faintly sweet. The chest sat beneath the low roof exactly as I remembered, the tiny carved symbol glowing faintly when the light caught its grooves. My hands hesitated over the latch, almost reverent. When it opened, silence deepened. Inside lay stacks of journals bound in worn cloth, bundled letters, tied with ribbon, receipts yellowed by decades, and at the very bottom the envelope I had last held the night she gave it to me. The seal broke with a sigh. Inside were legal forms so precise that even my untrained eyes recognized their meaning years before the will was drafted. She had quietly transferred ownership of a few acres and the small trust attached to them into my name, the date marked it as irrevocable. She must have known how my brother would react. The official paperwork had only ever told half the truth. My breath caught not with triumph, but with awe at her layered foresight. In her quietness, she had done what noise could never achieve: preserved fairness without fueling vanity. Still, I did not rush to tell anyone. Her voice lived in memory. Patient and steady, some lessons only bloom when they are not forced open. I folded the papers back, replaced the chest exactly as it was, and descended the attic steps as if coming down from a sacred hill. Over the months that followed, I spent my evenings on the neglected portion of that inherited land, a small patch of fields and a farmhouse roof surrendering to ivy. The work began clumsy and solitary, scraping rust, trimming overgrowth, oiling broken hinges. My palms blistered, my back stiffened, yet the ache felt cleaner than grief. Each repair was a conversation with her absence, each seed planted a small answer to emptiness. Spring brought rain that washed through the open windows, rinsing away years of dust. I swept the puddles out with a broom and realized that water sounds almost like forgiveness when it moves through echoes of a house. There was no rush, no plan grand enough to announce. While my brother posted updates about his achievements, I worked quietly, measuring success by the sound of soil settling around roots. In solitude, resentment softened until all that remained was gratitude that she had trusted me with both responsibility and restraint. Neighbors stopped by now and then, drawn by curiosity. They spoke gently about the old place getting new life. I offered them tea, deflecting questions about ownership. Gossip travels faster than wind in a small town, but I let it travel without correction. The property started to resemble her sensibility, orderly but alive. Birds returned to the eaves. The kitchen smelled faintly of polished wood again. Some nights I would sit on the porch, the horizon dimming to violet, and reread passages from her notebook. Each entry a reminder of her invisible sacrifices, how many times she had refused help to stay independent, how she had paid quietly for my brother's college debt without telling him. These revelations hurt kindly, like a needle stitching torn cloth. She had loved him without blindness and me without condition. By late summer, the land was blossoming, paths clear, fences straight, and the house breathing again. That was when whispers began circulating around town, talk of developers scouting new plots near the highway. My brother, smelling opportunity, boasted at a gathering that he would soon sell parcels next to my mother's land. Small-town rumors, however, move with their own momentum, and I heard in passing that county lines were newly digitalized, precise, down to a single inch. My name buried in those records would inevitably surface. I did not seek out confrontation, but a quiet certainty began to grow beside me, like one of the young trees I had planted. Truth does not demand witnesses, yet it knows when to reveal itself. Whenever rain polished the window panes until they mirrored the world outside, I caught my reflection, tired, resolute, no longer angry. That was how I began to feel her company again. Not as loss, but as guidance, preparing me for the conversation that was destined to come. The county office smelled of toner and old dust, its fluorescent lights humming with that sterile insistence found only in government buildings. I stood by, the counter documents ready for the clerk to verify, when the door swung open hard enough to rattle the glass. My brother arrived, voice already raised before words even formed. His confidence entered first, the rest of him following like an afterthought. The clerk looked up, startled, as he demanded to know about property boundaries that must be wrong, his name booming through the quiet. I did not interrupt. The papers were spread neatly between us, maps, deeds, signatures unmistakably hers. When the clerk found the right record and turned the page, his finger rested on the date preceding her will by 3 years. These parcels, he explained, soft but firm, are registered to her younger son. Transfer notarized and complete. My brother blinked once, twice, the calculation behind his eyes faltering. The color bled from his face. Those around us paused their motions, each sensing that some private gravity had shifted. The silence flattened the air. He turned to me with a half-formed smile, brittle as glass. So that is why you are not angry. I held his gaze slow and steady, every memory of childhood summers and winter quarrels flickering somewhere behind my calm. She knew what each of us valued most, I said. The shifting of a single paper sounded louder than a shout. He stared at the deed, reading and rereading her signature as if the familiar script had betrayed him. For a heartbeat he looked almost boyish, again confused, small, searching for correction. But there was no correction to find. Someone cleared a throat. Footsteps echoed across linoleum. The room resumed its rhythm, but conversation clung invisibly. To us, within hours, I knew the whole town would be murmuring. Word travels faster than mail in places where history is everyone's currency. Some would sympathize with him, others with me. Most would trade theories over coffee about a mother's divided love. Yet none of that mattered in that hushed space, where truth had simply returned to its rightful owner. I gathered the documents, slid them into my folder, and thanked the clerk. My brother stood still, staring at nothing. For the first time perhaps in our lives, his voice held no echo of triumph. I never understood her, he whispered. I thought she wanted us to compete so the family name would stay strong. She wanted peace, I replied. That is what she spent her life building, while we fought over pieces of it. Outside, clouds pressed low against the horizon. The first drops touched the courthouse steps as we walked out, slow, unplanned symmetry between weather and revelation. The parking lot was nearly empty. He followed me halfway to my car before stopping. You are not going to gloat, he asked, quietly, rain dotting his sleeves. There is nothing to gloat about, I said, opening the door. She gave each of us exactly what we asked for. You wanted proof of worth, I wanted her trust. We both got what we earned. He did not respond. Just looked up into the dissolving sky water, tracing down his face, maybe tears, maybe not. As I drove away, the wipers beat a steady rhythm, and for the first time that rhythm was not an echo of loss. It sounded instead like something beginning again. That night, back in the farmhouse's restored study, I opened her fragile notebook for the 100th time. Near the end, tucked behind housekeeping lists and penciled notes, waited a folded page in her handwriting I had somehow missed before. I unfolded it carefully. Her message was brief, warm by time, yet intact. My dear sons, if you are reading this, I trust the truth has found you both. What I leave each of you is not an award or apology, but opportunity. Remember that respect is not divided like land. Love grows where it is tended, even between stubborn hearts. Be kind to each other, for that will be my greatest inheritance. The words blurred through the film of my unfallen tears. I read them aloud, her voice weaving itself between the cracks of the house across the rain that whispered against window panes. Peace rose quietly in me, not victory, not satisfaction, but something gentler, weightless, complete. I closed the notebook and let the thunder roll far away beyond the fields. The wind slipped through the open window, carrying the scent of wet earth and lilac. It moved around me like breath, like renewal. He came to the farmhouse on a late summer afternoon, his car rolling up the gravel drive slower than I had ever seen him move. The arrogance that used to arrive with him like perfume was gone. He stepped out carefully, eyes lowered, the crisp confidence replaced by plain humility. I met him halfway down the path. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then he managed a smile too fragile to last and said, I drove by this place so many times before I realized how alive it looks again. Inside, the kitchen smelled of simmering tomatoes and basil, my attempt at mother's favorite stew. He helped slice the bread, hands uncertain around the knife, the silence between us warm and uneasy. We ate at the same oak table that had held decades of our family's noise. This time every movement felt deliberate, the clink of spoons, the quiet pouring of broth, a nod of thanks without words. He looked around the room. I should have been here, he said finally, eyes tracing the polished beams. All those years I thought winning meant being elsewhere. I did not contradict him. There are truths better absorbed without echo. We spent the afternoon sorting through a box of old photographs, his laughter softening at each memory, a humility rising like morning mist. When he left, he stood at the doorway and said, I am glad she left this to you. You are the only one who could have kept it breathing. I watched the car disappear beyond the oak line, and for the first time since the call that started everything, I felt no distance between us. Not brother against brother, just two people finally standing on the same piece of ground. In town, people murmured about how things turned out right. They loved the symmetry of the tale, greedy heir loses claim, quiet one restored. Some even called it miraculous. But I stayed apart from the talk. The true miracle I knew was not in documents or deeds, but in the stillness that had replaced resentment. Days folded into weeks, weeks into months. The farmhouse and the land settled into their rhythm. Summer light mellowed into copper leaves. Autumn rain softened the edge of the soil. By winter the fields slept under snow like linen pulled across a tired face. Come spring the grain rose again, level, patient, golden as forgiveness. Whenever wind passed through the rows, they bowed gracefully. Before standing tall once more, a quiet reminder of what humility finally allows room for growth. And as I leaned against the porch rail, watching the fields shimmer under the evening light, I understood that not every story of justice needs applause. Sometimes its sound is simply the hush that follows reconciliation. Years slip by with the easy rhythm of seasons instead of battles. The sharp edges of that inheritance faded until only memory's soft outline remained. My brother and I found a way to coexist that would have startled our younger selves. He had changed quietly, almost invisibly, trading ambition's glare for steadier light. I would hear of him volunteering at the parish food drive, helping rebuild porches for families who reminded him maybe of us before pride widened the gap. Our conversations were shorter now, but sincere, a few calls. Each month exchanged updates, laughter that no longer sounded hollow. The farmhouse had evolved too. I turned the front fields into a community learning garden dedicated to our mother. Children from nearby schools came to plant seedlings, retirees taught pruning and soil care. Her memory spread through gestures rather than plaques. Every visitor smiled differently when they left, calmer, as if reminded of something they had almost forgotten about: patience and growth. Some afternoons I would pause beneath the orchard trees, the same ones my mother once pruned, and think back to that night, the call, the insult, the smile that confused even me. I understand it now. It was not victory that made me smile, it was certainty. The quiet conviction that truth, no matter how cleverly disguised, has its own current. It always returns to the surface, slow but relentless. We spend our lives chasing proof that goodness pays off, that kindness outlasts competition. Yet the real inheritance waits in smaller places: how we choose to speak, the hands we offer, the honesty we refuse to misplace. My mother knew that. She did not just divide property, she distributed lessons disguised as choices. So, as twilight folds itself over the house each evening, the windows flicker to life, each one carrying the glow she once kindled with her calm industry. And I stand there unburdened by ownership papers or envy, thankful that her wisdom lasted longer than her belongings. My brother may hold the keys to her house, but I keep the light she lit in every window. Asterisk,